All right, welcome back to the Beyond the Blueprint podcast. My name is Jayme Bertish, marketing coordinator for the Staenberg Group. I'm here with Tim Lowe. Tim, thank you very much for being with us. Before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about your role here at TSG and a little bit about your background?
So I've been at TSG about 16 years now. I am the Senior Vice President of Development. I handle development of new projects, work on some existing stuff. I've been a developer for the last 35 years. Actually started work at May Company in the mid 80s. Did a lot of regional shopping center work on regional shopping centers. Also had the opportunity to work in the airport world. Did some concession work at some of the major airports on the East Coast, running concession programs. Also had the opportunity to work on the World Trade Center. We were able to buy the World Trade Center and run the retail, and have been working at TSG here for the last 16 years, working on some development projects.
Awesome. So we are very excited to ask you a little bit about downtown Chesterfield. It's a big development, and the first thing that I kind of want to talk about is this idea. I know you have some feelings about the city within a city concept. So tell us a little bit about when we talk about city within a city, what does that look like, and what does that mean for downtown Chesterfield?
One of the neat things is there's not a lot of great examples out there in the United States. There are some, but not a lot. But the idea is that people ultimately want to go back to a situation where they live in an environment where you can walk to a restaurant, you can walk to a coffee shop, you can walk to the park. And the way that most cities, including St. Louis, have developed, we've created this downtown core, and everything else became suburbia. And if you look in Chesterfield today, Chesterfield is mostly single-family homes, very few, apartment complexes, really no downtown. And the idea of creating a city in a city is really creating kind of an urban downtown in a suburban environment. And what it does is it brings in multifamily, townhomes, various forms of residential, but it also mixes them with retail, food, supermarket, park, bike paths, and all the amenities. So it really allows you to live in a really phenomenal area like Chesterfield, but yet the benefit of, I want to walk to coffee, I want to walk to dinner, I want to walk to the park, and living in kind of a fun urban environment.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about this formula of getting retail and residential and office. What kind of strategy goes behind that? And why is that important too?
I think the important part of the strategy is it really starts with creating a community. You don't have a downtown unless you have a community. You have to create a community. And the way to create a community is to bring in multifamily and other residential forms. Bringing in residential is probably the most important part of establishing a downtown. And in downtown Chesterfield, we have the ability to bring in about 2,500 residential units, combination of townhomes or condos or rental multifamily. And I think that starts with that strategy. And then from that strategy, you look at additional offerings, which typically is office. Office is a great kind of co-offering with residential, where you've kind of got that downtown feel. People both live there and work there. And then you want to service them. And you don't want to just service those two components, but you want to be able to service the entire community. I mean, it's a regional project, not a local project. And for that, you want to bring in a nice amount of retail and restaurants. And you also want to bring in public amenities, park, bike path, walking trails, things like that. So I think the formula really starts with residential and bringing in residential and creating a community. And then once you've created that community, it's serving the community.
So in regards to the development side of things, when we talk about attracting, I talked with Michael a little bit about we want quote unquote high-end tenants. So what happens around the development side to ensure that we are being attractive and making sure that this development is attracting those high-end tenants?
So I think you have to start by looking at the market itself. And in Chesterfield, you have the Valley. So we will always compete with the Valley. Valley has the largest power center, in the U.S., also has an outlet mall, also has an entertainment center. So I think that the hole in the market always was high-end retail. Most of the high-end retailers that are here in St. Louis that are located either, at the Gallery or at West County should be at Chesterfield. And why were they out at Chesterfield? There was no place for them. So we have to create an environment that will attract those high-end tenants that we're looking for. And to do that, one, it's all of the residential that we're bringing in. Two, it's all of the amenities that we're bringing in. So we've got to create an environment where it's not just ad hoc retail. There is actually a lot of retail that has co-tenancy, that's connected, that feels like, a shopping mall. And the way that we're going to do that at Downtown Chesterfield is we're going to put a park in the very center of the project. That park is 3.3 acres. It's the centerpiece of the project. And then all of the buildings that surround the park on all four sides will have first floor retail. So that gives us the ability to add about 125,000 square feet of really good retail and allows us to bring in enough categories that those higher end tenants have the co-tenancy that they're looking for.
Hmm. So what's the power behind having those high-end retail in places like that? But I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, what's the importance of allowing people, not just on the weekend, to stay in downtown Chesterfield, but what makes them want to stay on Mondays and Tuesdays, those days that are a little bit slower?
Well, the neat thing about it is that you're bringing in a substantial amount of retail, and it will wind up being kind of the upscale shopping center for the Chesterfield market. So people who live, in that western suburb are going to look at Chesterfield as being the place to shop. If I want to go to high-end retail, I don't have to go to Frontenac. I don't have to go to the Galleria. I don't have to go to West County. I can go to Chesterfield because those shops are located at Chesterfield. The other thing is we're going to have a high percentage of food tenants, both restaurants, sit down, fast food, QSRs. So your lunch traffic, your dinner traffic, people who live in the market will use that as an option to eat for lunch and or for dinner. And I think the other piece is you really become kind of that regional hub. You're really that Western regional hub that people want to go to. I want to go to the park. I want to ride my bike around the bike path. All those options available to bring people to downtown Chesterfield.
Yeah. So what do you think has been the biggest challenge in regards to this project? I know you've done a lot of different projects, but what makes this one different?
So the thing I think is probably most unique about projects like this is one, I'll start with the site. Very rarely do you find 90 acres available at a phenomenal intersection in a phenomenal market. And because of the fact that Chesterfield Mall declined and ultimately failed, you were able to create the opportunity. But I think that the key part of what's so important is that, you're creating something very unique and very different in a market that becomes a driver. I mean, it's an economic hub. And what I think is most complicated about it is, shopping centers are zoned accordingly. Shopping center zoning typically does not allow you to do residential. Also, you have to put in a lot of public infrastructure. Tearing the mall down and putting in all the streets and sidewalks, and you're putting in that urban grid to create that urban feel is expensive. So the two critical parts to make this happen were, one, we had to rezone the property. And when you rezone property, especially in the Chesterfield market, the citizen groups got very active. So we spent a lot of time working with citizen groups, with locals, with residents, with the city, trying to make sure that we weren't going to, completely impact the entire area, that it was a positive, not a negative. But also, we really had to work with the city to help us find vehicles to fund infrastructure. And the way we did that was through the approval of a TIF, which gives us funding for us to go in and build all of the public infrastructure, from roads and sidewalks and landscape areas and the park and public parking and things like that.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about some of the things that you have done from just you, like behind the scenes. What kind of work have you been working on to make this a successful development?
Well, one, I had to spend a lot of time with the citizen groups. Ultimately, they are our customers, so we don't want to alienate them. We want to, align them with us. So we spent a lot of time working with the citizen groups, trying to get their approval and their support to be part of the project. Number two, the city of Chesterfield. We had to convince them that this was good for Chesterfield, it was right for Chesterfield, it was going to work. And, Chesterfield's only done one TIF so far, and it was the Valley when the Valley flooded. So the idea that there was a blight in Chesterfield was very hard for them to accept. But ultimately, we had to get the city of Chesterfield to support the project and support the fact that we were going to need public funding to be able to help fund this. Beyond that, it's just a lot of the pieces. How do you make it work? How do you get reimbursed for different things? How do you create a project that's attractive? How do you attract, developers that want to come in and develop? How do you create that environment? Just a lot of the complications in projects like this. The one thing we did is we spent a lot of time going around the country looking at the better quality urban mixed-use projects, from Dallas to Austin to San Jose. I mean, we've looked at those projects that exist, and we've tried to copy those things that we thought worked really, really well. And we've tried to use those type of pieces here at downtown Chesterfield.
Yeah, we actually talked about that with Michael, and he said it is mixed use, but it's more so a downtown. So in your eyes, what is that? What's the difference between a mixed use
So
and
I think
downtown?
when you get into a mixture of uses or mixed use, it's more about, locating different components in different areas. And I think when you really have a downtown, it's more organic.
Mm,
The buildings don't necessarily all look alike. They look like they were developed at different times, and yet they feel like more of an organic downtown where you've got just a number of buildings and residential units around a park and bike path, and the amenities are all there, and it feels more like a downtown than a mixture of uses.
gotcha. So, what do you think is the biggest idea? Like, what are people saying? Are the questions that you've been hearing and things that people are arguing about, or challenges people think that you have? What are you hearing from the public?
I think the things that we hear a lot of, and one of the ironies of this is I probably get 1 to 3 calls a week from residents wanting to know how they can rent an apartment or buy a condo. And I have to point out that if you look at the site, we're still under construction. I mean, we're not there yet. But it's amazing to me the amount of people that live in that market that might live in a single family home, might be empty nesters, and want to live in a different environment. Want to live in a really cool environment where I can walk to coffee and I can walk to dinner and things like that. So one, it's the interest that we have out there of people that are interested already,
Hmm,
and we haven't even started construction yet, and we've
yeah,
got this list of people that want to get in. The second thing I hear a lot of is people in Chesterfield feel like they don't have upscale retail. And the market clearly drives that. I mean, the average household income for them is $200,000. It clearly drives that. And they're hoping that the retail we bring in is of better quality. You have all the chain restaurants down at the Valley, you have all of the locals over at the district. This is more, you're going to get more of the white tablecloth, the higher end, restaurants. And I think people in this market are looking for that. They don't want to go to West County or the Galleria. They want to stay in Chesterfield.
mhm,
And I think this will give them the chance to do that. The third thing I hear a lot of is, I want to go to the park. I mean, people, you don't realize how important that park is to this community. And green space is super important. And we're going to put in what really winds up being kind of a public park that's 3.3 acres. It'll be programmed. So it's going to have, it's going to have a stage, and it's going to have maybe a brew pub, but it'll handle art shows and farmers market and, those kind of things that bring people together and, just create this really cool community.
that's awesome. I'm really excited to see how that comes together. And I also wanted to ask a little bit about the Macy's building that's still standing. So I've heard a lot of questions in regards to how that's going to be used. Is it going to be used? So can you tell me a little bit about from the development side, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of having that huge building?
So when we acquired the Macy's building, we contemplated, do we tear it down or we try to reuse it? And the more that we looked at it, I think the building was in fairly good shape. It was reusable. It was at a great location that kind of was at the kind of the end of the park where a building would be needed. And we thought this was an opportunity to repurpose something. So in repurposing it, it's a 3-level building where we can take the first level and we can add retail, but we can also put in some users that are tougher to make in new buildings like a gym. Gym might have 18,000 square feet. Well, that's not going to fit in first level retail in a residential building. So now you've got the space to put a gym. But we can also take the second and third floor and we can turn that into office. And this is an office that competes with the existing office in the market. This is 70,000 square foot wide open floor plates that can have a really cool creative type of environment. So we knew it would be something different and unique that's not in the market today. So we decided to kind of use it as kind of the end cap of the park and try to repurpose it and bring it back to life.
Gotcha. Okay, well, one last question for you. I asked Michael about this, and I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are. But in about 10 years from now, when it's all hopefully, said and done, everything's kind of set up, everything will be, continuously being built. But when it's about 10 years from now, what do you hope to see? What do you hope to feel? And how do you hope other people feel when they think about downtown Chesterfield?
So one of the key things I think when you get into like identity, if you drive down 40 today and you see Clayton, you know it's Clayton because you see the tall buildings. And I think that you need these iconic kind of pieces to really make it something special. In 10 years, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see, 4 or 5 really tall buildings that kind of give you that iconic, there's downtown Chesterfield. I can see it as I drive down the highway. Otherwise it has more of a suburban feel. So you've got to really make it have that urban feel. And the urban feel is some high-rise buildings. But I really want it to be a community. I mean, we'll all, we have the ability to build 4.5 million square feet of density. It's a lot of density. And it's going to take time, and it's going to have to happen organically. You can't force it. You got to let it happen as the market dictates. But I really think in 10 years, no matter if we're at 3.5 or 4.5, I really want it to feel like a community. And one of the things that Michael and I noticed most as we looked at the project, the really cool part of it was we'd go there, we'd eat dinner, and then we'd walk out and sit down by the park and just watch activity. And what I really want it to feel like is if you go and you sit down, you see, young people with strollers walking, you see people enjoying the park, you see people at a restaurant sitting outside eating, you see people shopping. It's got to feel like a community. I got to feel like I'm in a downtown. And the thing that I think is really neat about what we're doing is one, downtown Chesterfield needs to be multi-generational, not all senior. It's got to be multi-generational. We want to be able to attract that empty nester that wants a really nice high-end apartment to live in or a high-end condo. But we also want to attract that young 20-something-year-old that maybe works in the Chesterfield market, but wants to live in a cool environment, doesn't want to have to live in Clayton and drive out. How do you duplicate what that appeal of Clayton is? And you do that with all the amenities. It's the food, it's the retail, it's the walking path, it's the bike path. And there are so many amenities around downtown Chesterfield, from the amphitheater and the Y and the library, that really connect into it. So we really want to create kind of a multi-generational community that feels like this is a really cool place. I want to walk, I want to eat, I want to live here. And I think that's really one of the advantages that downtown Chesterfield can be.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tim. I'm looking forward to just seeing how things develop, and we'll get back on, the podcast again, maybe in a year or so, whenever it is. But I'm sure that there's going to be more to report on. But thank you very much. And if anyone has questions in regards to the development, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer any questions. But thank you.